She knelt not in submission, but in survival, her breath steady, her eyes never leaving his. The Alpha King who claimed her as bride had finally stopped hunting. Now he was watching, and for the first time since she ran, she wondered if escaping him had ever been possible at all. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew about power, about choice, and about the dangerous space between breaking and bending. The veil fell from her hair like a discarded promise. Celeste didn't look back at the manor, its windows blazing with firelight and laughter. The wedding feast would continue without her. They would toast the union, raise goblets to the Alpha King who had chosen a nameless Omega from the northern provinces. They would celebrate a bond she had never agreed to. Her feet hit the forest floor in stolen boots. The dress, white silk that cost more than her family's land, dragged through mud and moss. She didn't care. She ran. The trees closed around her like skeletal fingers. Moonlight filtered through bare branches, casting fractured shadows that shifted with every step. Her lungs burned. The corset dug into her ribs, but she didn't slow. Behind her, the manor's bells began to ring. They knew. Celeste veered left, following the sound of running water. The river would mask her scent. It had to. She'd heard stories of werewolf alphas, how they hunted, how they tracked. Cale Thorne was human, but that made him no less dangerous. His reputation preceded him like a winter storm. The Alpha King who unified 5 territories through force and cold calculation. The man who took what he wanted and crushed what resisted. She reached the riverbank and hesitated. The water churned black and violent, swollen from recent rains. Ice crusted the edges. If she crossed, hypothermia would take her before dawn. If she stayed, he would find her before midnight. The choice wasn't a choice at all. Celeste waded in. The cold hit like a blade, stealing her breath. She pushed forward, fighting the current, forcing her legs to move through water that felt like broken glass against her skin. The dress became an anchor. She clawed at the fabric, tearing seams until enough gave way that she could move. Halfway across, her foot slipped. The current pulled her under. She surfaced gasping, lungs screaming. Her hands found a rock, sharp edges cutting her palms. She held on, dragged herself forward, crawled onto the opposite bank on hands and knees. Behind her, through the rush of water, came the sound of hooves. Celeste pushed to her feet and ran again. The forest on this side was older, darker. Trees grew so close their roots formed walls. She wove between them, ignoring the branches that caught her skin, the stones that bruised her feet. Her body was a machine now, fear-driven, survival-focused. Nothing else mattered. A howl split the night. Not a wolf. Human. A signal. They were coordinating. Celeste changed direction, heading uphill toward the cliffs. Bad terrain for horses. Better odds for her. The incline burned her thighs, made her calves scream, but she climbed. Rocks gave way beneath her hands. She slipped, caught herself, kept moving. At the top, she paused. Below, torches moved through the forest like fireflies. Too many. At least a dozen riders, spreading out in a grid pattern. Professional. Methodical. Hunting her. She turned and kept running along the cliff's edge. The drop to her right was sheer, 100 feet of empty air ending in jagged rocks. To her left, the forest thinned into open ground. No cover. No options. The torches were getting closer. Celeste stopped at an outcropping of stone. Below, a narrow ledge ran along the cliff face, disappearing into shadow. She could climb down, hide, wait for them to pass. Or she could fall and end this. The thought came unbidden, cold and clear. She shook it away and began to climb. The stone was slick with frost. Her fingers found holds by memory, by desperation. She lowered herself onto the ledge and pressed her back against the cliff. Above, the torches drew closer. Voices carried on the wind, commands, coordinates. Then silence. Celeste held her breath. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might give her away. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time lost meaning in the dark. A stone skittered down from above. She looked up. Cale Thorne stood at the cliff's edge, looking down at her. He didn't shout for his men. Didn't call out. He simply stood there, backlit by moonlight, utterly still. His face was cast in shadow, but she could feel his gaze, heavy, measured, weighing her like prey. Celeste pressed harder against the stone. There was nowhere to go. Behind her, the drop. Above her, him. He crouched at the edge, forearms resting on his knees. Still silent. Still watching. "Come up," he said finally. His voice was low, controlled. Not angry. That was worse. She didn't move. "You're on a ledge 6 inches wide, in a torn dress, in freezing temperatures." He tilted his head. "You have 2 choices. Climb up or fall. I'm not coming down there." Celeste's jaw tightened. "Then I'll wait." "For what?" "For you to leave." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his shadowed face. "I'm not leaving." They stared at each other across the empty air. The wind picked up, biting through her wet clothes. She started to shiver and hated herself for it. Cale stood. For a moment, she thought he might turn away. Instead, he removed his coat, heavy black wool lined with fur, and dropped it over the edge. It landed at her feet. "Freeze if you want," he said. "But do it by choice, not stupidity." Then he turned and walked back into the forest, leaving her alone on the cliff with his coat and the sound of her own ragged breathing. Celeste didn't touch the coat. She sat on the ledge, back pressed to frozen stone, and watched dawn creep across the valley. The coat lay crumpled at her feet like a test, like bait. Every few minutes, her body would shake so violently her teeth clattered, but she didn't reach for it. He wanted her to. Above, she heard nothing. No voices. No movement. But she knew he hadn't left. Cale Thorne didn't strike her as a man who made empty threats. If he said he'd wait, he'd wait. The question was, how long could she? The sun rose properly now, pale and weak through winter clouds. Light revealed what darkness had hidden, how high she actually was, how narrow the ledge, how far the drop. Her stomach lurched. She looked away, focusing instead on her hands. The cuts from the river had scabbed over. Her palms were streaked with dried blood and dirt. She'd worn worse. Growing up in the northern provinces meant survival was currency. Omega status meant nothing when wolves, real ones, not the metaphorical kind, came for your livestock. When winter lasted 9 months and food ran short. When illness swept through and bodies piled in frozen ground. She'd survived all of that. She could survive this. Footsteps crunched on stone above. Celeste looked up. Cale stood at the edge again, this time in full daylight. She saw him clearly now, tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair pulled back from a face that was all hard angles and controlled expression. His eyes were pale gray, like ice over deep water. He wore no crown, no regalia. Just black riding clothes and boots. He looked down at her. Then at the coat still lying untouched. "Stubborn," he said. Not a question. She said nothing. He crouched again, same position as last night. "You're cold enough that hypothermia is setting in. Another hour, maybe 2, and you won't be able to climb even if you wanted to. You understand that?" "Yes." "And you're staying anyway?" "Yes." Cale studied her for a long moment. "Why did you run?" The question surprised her. She'd expected commands, threats, demands. Not curiosity. "Because I didn't agree to marry you," she said. "Your father agreed. I'm not my father. You're Omega." He had the right. He had nothing. Her voice came sharper than intended. "He sold me to clear a debt. That's not agreement. That's transaction." Something shifted in Cale's expression. Not softening, he didn't seem capable of that, but a kind of recalibration. Like he was adjusting his understanding of what sat before him. So you ran, he said slowly, onto a cliff ledge. In winter. With no plan beyond, not here. Better than staying. Is it? He gestured to the valley below. You're trapped. Freezing. Wounded. And I'm still here. What exactly have you won? Celeste lifted her chin. I'm not in that manner. I'm not standing beside you pretending this is anything but force. That's enough. Cale was quiet for several beats. Then he stood, brushed frost from his knees, and looked down at her one more time. I'll be back at sunset, he said. If you're still here, still alive, I'll bring food. If you've fallen, I'll retrieve your body and bury it properly. If you've climbed up, we talk. He turned to leave, then paused. The coat stays, he added. Use it or don't. But if you freeze to death out of spite, you're not proving strength. You're proving waste. Then he was gone. Celeste listened to his footsteps fade. When silence returned, she finally looked at the coat. It was heavier than it looked, lined with fur that still held his warmth. She imagined pulling it on, how the cold would ease, how the shaking would stop, how much easier everything would become. She left it where it was. The day passed slowly. The sun never fully broke through the clouds. Her fingers went numb first, then her toes. She tucked her hands under her arms and drew her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible. Conserving heat. Voices drifted up from below occasionally. His men, searching the forest. They never looked up, never found her. Cale hadn't told them where she was. Why? The question gnawed at her. He could have dragged her up by now. Could have sent soldiers down on ropes. Could have waited her out until cold or hunger forced her to surrender. Instead, he gave her a coat and walked away. It didn't fit. Alpha Kings didn't grant mercy. Didn't negotiate. They took, they commanded, they broke. Unless he was playing a different game. Sunset came as promised. Cale returned to the cliff's edge with a pack slung over his shoulder. He looked down at her, still there, still alive, coat still untouched, and nodded once. Like she'd passed some test. He unpacked bread, dried meat, a flask, set them at the edge, and pushed them over. Celeste caught the food but let the flask fall. It clattered onto the rocks below. Cale raised an eyebrow. Water's not submission. Everything from you is strings attached, not strings. Acknowledgement. He settled into his watching position. You're still here. That means you're strong enough to be worth this. Worth what? The wait. Celeste stared at him. You're waiting for me to break. No. Cale's pale eyes held hers. I'm waiting for you to understand that breaking isn't the same as bending. One destroys. The other survives. He stood then, brushed off his knees. Eat or don't. Tomorrow I'll be back. And the day after. And the day after that. He started to walk away, then added over his shoulder, I'm a patient man, Celeste. And you're already proving you're worth the patience. Her name in his mouth felt like a brand. Will she survive the cold? Or will the Alpha King break her first? Subscribe to see what happens when survival meets dominance and acknowledgement becomes something far more dangerous. On the third day, Celeste ate the bread. She told herself it was strategy, not surrender. Her body needed fuel. Starvation wouldn't prove anything except stupidity. But when she bit into the dark rye, still faintly warm from wherever Cale's camp was, she tasted defeat mixed with survival. The coat remained untouched. He came at dawn this time, earlier than before. Mist clung to the valley, turning the world soft and gray. He carried nothing with him, no food, no water. Just himself, and that same measured patience. You ate, he observed. I'm not suicidal. Good. He sat fully this time, legs dangling over the edge. Close enough that she could see the calluses on his hands, the scar along his jaw. Tell me about the northern provinces. The question caught her off guard. Why? Because you're from there. Because I'm trying to understand what makes someone choose a cliff ledge over a warm bed. You already know. You said it yourself, I'm Omega. I was sold. That's the transaction, Kale said. I'm asking about you. Celeste studied him. There was no softness in his face, no false sympathy. Just genuine curiosity, clinical and controlled. Like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. It's cold, she said finally. 10 months of winter. The ground freezes so deep you can't bury the dead properly, so you burn them instead. Wolves come down from the mountains when food is scarce. Real wolves, not your kind. I'm not a wolf. No. You're worse. His mouth twitched. Almost a smile. How? Wolves kill for hunger. You kill for territory. I haven't killed you. Yet. I won't. He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. You're too interesting alive. Celeste laughed, sharp, bitter. Is that what I am? Entertainment? No. You're proof. Of what? Kale leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Every Omega I've met has been taught to fold. To submit before the challenge even begins. Fear drilled in so deep they can't separate it from instinct. His pale eyes locked on hers. You ran. Not away from me. You didn't know me. You ran from the concept. That's different. So you're studying me? I'm recognizing you. He stood, stretched his shoulders. There's a difference. Before she could respond, he turned and walked away. No food. No water. No explanation. Just recognition. The day stretched long and cold. Celeste's body had adapted somewhat. The shaking came in waves now instead of constantly. But her thoughts had grown sharper, more dangerous. She kept replaying his words. You're proof. Proof of what? That Omegas could resist? That defiance existed outside of submission? Or proof that he could break even the stubborn ones, given time? She dozed fitfully as afternoon light slanted across the cliff. Dreams came fragmented, her father's face, the manor's white walls, the wedding dress sinking in black water. In every dream, pale gray eyes watched from the shadows. When she woke, sunset was bleeding across the horizon. And Kale was back. This time he brought a blanket. He dropped it over the edge without a word. It landed next to the coat, equally ignored. Then he sat at his usual spot and waited. You're trying to make me comfortable, Celeste said. I'm trying to keep you alive. Why? I told you. You're worth the patience. That's not an answer. Kale tilted his head, considering. When I was 16, my father made me hunt a wolf that had been killing livestock. Tracked it for 3 days. When I finally cornered it, I realized it wasn't attacking out of aggression, it was protecting cubs. It could have run, could have abandoned them and saved itself. But it stayed. He paused. I let it go, moved the livestock instead. Celeste frowned. What does that have to do with me? You could have accepted the marriage, played the part, waited for an opportunity to disappear safely. Instead, you ran on your wedding night into winter with nothing. His gaze was steady. That's not stupidity. That's someone protecting something they value more than safety. My freedom. Yourself. He stood. Freedom is external. What you're protecting is internal. That's rarer. He left without waiting for a response. Celeste stared at the blanket, at the coat, at the 2 gestures she hadn't asked for, but that represented something she couldn't quite name. The cold bit deeper as night fell. Her fingers had gone past numb into a distant ache that felt separate from her body. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Every breath hurt. She looked at the coat, then at the long drop below, then back at the coat. He's waiting for you to understand that breaking isn't the same as bending. Celeste reached for the coat slowly, like it might burn her. The fur lining was impossibly soft. She pulled it around her shoulders, and warmth flooded in so fast it was almost painful. She wrapped the blanket around her legs, and she wept, silent, furious tears that froze on her cheeks. Not because she'd broken, but because she'd bent, and part of her hated that it felt like relief. Above, hidden in the tree line, Cale watched the ledge. He saw the moment she finally pulled the coat on, saw her shoulders shake with more than cold. He turned and walked back to camp. "Should we bring her up now?" one of his men asked. "No," Cale said quietly. "She's not ready yet." Ready for what? To understand that strength isn't refusal, it's choice. He poured himself water and stared into the fire, thinking about wolves and cubs and the difference between breaking and bending. Tomorrow, he'd bring her meat, and the day after, something warm to drink. And he'd keep waiting until she chose to climb, not because he commanded it, but because she decided he was worth bending toward. On the fourth day, Celeste spoke first. "Why aren't you married already?" Cale had just arrived at the cliff's edge, the morning sun catching in his dark hair. He paused mid-crouch, eyebrows lifting slightly. The first genuine surprise she'd seen from him. "That's your question? You're a king. She gestured vaguely at him, wrapped now in his coat and blanket. "Whatever this is. Why did you need a purchased Omega bride?" He settled into his usual position. "I didn't need one. I wanted one." "That's worse." "Is it?" Cale tilted his head. "Every woman of status who's been offered to me came with expectations. Alliances to honor. Territory to merge. Political games to play. I wanted someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove. You wanted someone powerless. I wanted someone who'd fight." His pale eyes held hers. "There's a difference." Celeste pulled the coat tighter. The cold was marginally more bearable now, but her body felt hollowed out, running on empty. "You could have found a warrior. A trained fighter. Warriors fight battles. You're fighting for yourself." He leaned forward. "Tell me, when you were on that ledge the first night before I dropped the coat, what were you thinking?" She didn't answer immediately. The memory was still sharp, the cold, the fear, the distant thought that falling might be easier than continuing. "I was thinking about whether endurance was the same as winning," she said finally. "And I still don't know." Cale nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something. Most people decide quickly. They either give up or they power through on pure stubbornness. You're doing neither. You're analyzing. You say that like it's unusual. For an Omega? It is. He held up a hand before she could snap back. "That's not judgment. That's observation. Your designation has been shaped by centuries of social structure. Most Omegas I've met were taught not to question, not to strategize. Just to comply or flee. And you think you're different? Better?" "No. I think I'm aware." He stood, brushed frost from his pants. "I'll be back tonight. I'm bringing stew. Hot. You'll eat it." "You don't command me." Not a command. A prediction. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "You wore the coat. You'll eat the stew. Not because I'm forcing you, but because you're smart enough to know that survival requires compromise." He left before she could argue. True to his word, he returned at dusk with a covered bowl that steamed in the cold air. He lowered it carefully on a rope, along with a spoon and cloth napkin. Celeste stared at the setup. The napkin was embroidered with his family crest, a crowned wolf beneath two crossed swords. "You brought me fine dining," she said dryly. "I've brought you food." Cale settled at the edge. The napkin was just what was available. She ate. The stew was rich, venison, root vegetables, herbs she couldn't identify. Each bite felt like betrayal and relief in equal measure. Her body responded with desperate gratitude, warmth spreading through her chest. Cale watched in silence until she'd finished. "Better?" he asked. "Functional." "I'll take it." He paused. "Ask me something else." Celeste set the bowl aside. Why patience? You're a king. You could have hauled me up by force days ago. Force breaks things. I don't want you broken. What do you want? The question hung between them. Kale was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more careful. I want to know what you look like when you stop running. When you choose to stay instead of being forced. When you bend because you've decided I'm worth bending toward, not because you've been beaten into it. He met her eyes. That version of you, the one who chooses. That's what I want. Celeste's breath caught. It wasn't romantic, wasn't soft, but it was honest in a way that felt more dangerous than any threat. And if I never choose, she asked, then I've wasted 4 days on a cliff. He shrugged. But I don't think I have. You're still here. Still talking to me. Still eating my food and wearing my coat. You're already choosing. You just haven't admitted it yet. That's arrogance. That's pattern recognition. He stood. Get some sleep, Celeste. Tomorrow I'll bring you tea. I don't drink tea. You will. He walked away, then called back over his shoulder. It's mint. You'll like it. She didn't ask how he knew. That night, wrapped in his coat and blanket, full for the first time in days, Celeste lay on the ledge and stared at the stars. They were impossibly bright this far from any settlement, scattered diamonds on black velvet. She thought about choices, about the difference between giving up and giving in, about how Kale had been right. She was already compromising, already bending. But bending toward what? A king who saw her as proof? As an interesting puzzle? As something worth waiting for? Or toward herself, the version who could acknowledge that survival sometimes meant accepting help. That strength wasn't always refusal. Her fingers traced the embroidered crest on the napkin. A crown wolf. Not a real one, Kale was human. But the symbolism remained. Power, territory, dominance. And beneath it, her. Still on a cliff. Still choosing moment by moment whether to fall or climb. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she'd ask him what happened after she climbed. If she climbed. The question mark mattered. She's bending, but not breaking, and he's patient enough to wait for her choice. Subscribe to see what happens when survival becomes something far more complicated than escape. The tea was perfect. Celeste hated that detail, most of all. Kale lowered it on the 5th morning. A clay mug wrapped in cloth to keep it warm, steam rising in curls. Mint as promised with something else. Honey maybe. Lemon. She drank it slowly, letting the heat seep into her frozen hands. Across the gap, Kale sat cross-legged instead of crouched. More relaxed. Like they were having tea in a parlor instead of across a 100-foot drop. You look better, he observed. I look less dead. There's a difference. I'll take it. He pulled something from his pocket, an apple, deep red. He bit into it, the crack sharp in the morning quiet. Tell me about running away. Before this, as a child. Celeste frowned. What makes you think I did? Because you're good at it. Too good for this to be your first time. He took another bite. Where'd you go? She shouldn't answer. Shouldn't give him anything personal. But the tea was warm, and she was tired, and something about the way he asked, casual, genuinely curious, made the words slip out. The forest, north of our settlement. There were caves. How old? 8 the first time. 12 the last. What were you running from? Celeste stared into her mug. My father. When he drank. And after my mother died. He drank often. Kale stopped chewing. Swallowed. He hit you. Not a question. Does it matter? She asked. It does if it explains why you'd rather freeze on a ledge than accept safety from a stranger. His voice stayed level, but something had sharpened in his gaze. You don't trust safety. Because every time it was offered before, it came with conditions. With costs. Celeste said nothing. He was too close to truths she'd buried. I'm not your father, Kale said quietly. No. You're a king who bought an omega to prove a point. To find someone worth the crown beside mine. He set the apple aside. There's a difference. Is there? You still purchased me. Still claimed ownership. I claimed right to court you. That's different from ownership. The law says. I don't care what the law says. He leaned forward. You're on a cliff because I gave you the option to refuse. If I wanted ownership, you'd be in that manor right now, and we both know it. I could have dragged you back the first night. Could have sent 10 men down to haul you up. I didn't. Because you want me compliant. Because I want you willing. His pale eyes held hers. Compliance is hollow. Willingness has weight. Celeste set the mug down carefully. Her hands were shaking, but not from cold. You're asking me to give you something I've never given anyone. Trust. Choice. Myself, like you said. I'm asking you to consider it. Why should I? Cale was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled off his right glove and held out his hand, palm up. An old scar ran across it. White, raised, shaped like a crescent moon. When I was 17, I took an arrow meant for my younger brother. It went through my hand, shattered bone. The healers said I'd lose function, that I'd never hold a sword properly again. He flexed his fingers. I spent 2 years relearning everything. How to grip, how to balance, how to fight. It was the most frustrating, painful period of my life. What's your point? My point is that nothing worth having comes easy. Not skill, not strength, not trust. He pulled the glove back on. You're the most difficult thing I've ever tried to earn. And I'm willing to keep trying, because you're worth it. Something cracked in Celeste's chest. Not breaking, shifting. Like ice beginning to thaw. What happens if I climb up? She asked. What's the expectation? We talk. Properly. In a warm room with actual chairs. And then, that depends on the conversation. He stood, brushed off his pants. But I promise you this. Nothing happens that you don't agree to. Not the marriage. Not anything else. You want to leave after we talk? I'll give you supplies, money, a horse. You want to stay? We figure out what that means together. You'd let me go? After all this? If that's your choice. He looked down at her, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his expression. I want you beside me, Celeste. But I want you there by choice, or not at all. He walked away before she could respond. Celeste sat on the ledge long after he'd gone, turning his words over like stones, examining them for lies, for traps, for hidden costs. She found none, just honesty. Frustrating, patient, infuriating honesty. Her body had adapted to the cold now. She wasn't dying anymore, just existing in stasis. But stasis wasn't living. And some distant part of her was tired. Not of fighting alone. She looked up at the cliff edge. 20 feet of rough stone. She'd climbed worse in the northern forests. Escaping her father. Escaping wolves. Escaping everything. Maybe it was time to escape toward something instead. The thought terrified her more than the drop. When Cale returned at sunset, he found her standing. One hand on the cliff face, testing holds. Not climbing yet, just considering. He said nothing. Just watched. Celeste looked up at him. If I come up and I don't like what you have to say, you'll let me go? Yes. Supplies, money, horse? Yes. Why should I believe you? Because I've spent 5 days proving it. He crouched at the edge. But you don't have to believe me. You just have to decide if it's worth the risk to find out. Celeste studied the holds again. Then she looked back up at him. Tomorrow, she said. I'll decide tomorrow. Cale nodded. Tomorrow, then. He left her his scarf this time. Soft wool, still warm from his neck. She wrapped it around hers and pretended it didn't feel like a promise. You want honesty? Celeste said. Here it is. I don't trust you. Cale didn't flinch. I know. Then why go through all of this? Why not just find someone who does? Because trust that's never tested is worthless. He refilled her tea, without asking. I don't want blind faith. I want earned confidence. That takes time. How much time? As much as you need. He set the pot down. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking you to stay. To see if this, he gestured between them, is worth exploring. As what? Your guest. As my potential partner. Cale leaned back in his chair. Here's what I'm proposing. You stay for 1 month. During that time, you have complete autonomy. Your own quarters. Freedom to go where you want in my territory. No guards unless you request them. No expectations of intimacy or submission. Celeste's eyes narrowed. What's the catch? You spend time with me. Dinners. Conversations. Council meetings if you're interested. I want you to see what my life actually is. What being beside me would mean. He paused. At the end of the month, you decide. Stay as my partner, with full legal rights and protections. Or leave with everything I promised. Supplies, money, horse, safe passage wherever you want to go. And if I decide to leave, then I let you go. No pursuit. No reclamation. You're free. It sounded too simple. Too clean. Celeste studied his face, searching for the trap. Why would you risk a month only to lose me anyway? Because the alternative is keeping someone who doesn't want to be kept. That's not partnership. That's imprisonment. His pale eyes held hers. I'd rather risk losing you than guarantee your resentment. Celeste stood, needing distance. She walked to the tent opening, looked out at the camp. His men moved with practiced efficiency, breaking down tents, packing supplies. Preparing to move. Where's the manor? She asked. 2 days north. We leave this afternoon. I'm expected to travel with you. In front of your people. Wearing what? The torn wedding dress. I had clothes brought. Your size. At her sharp look, he added, from measurements taken for the wedding dress. Not anything invasive. She turned back to him. You planned this. All of it. The chase, the cliff, the waiting. You knew I'd climb eventually. I hoped you would. There's a difference. Cale stood as well. I planned for both outcomes, you climbing and you falling. One ended with negotiation. The other ended with me burying you and rethinking my entire approach to partnership. The casual way he said it, not cruel, just factual, sent a chill through her. He'd meant it. If she'd fallen, he would have let her. No last-minute rescue. No dramatic save. He'd respected her choice, even if that choice was death. Something in her chest tightened. 1 month, she said slowly. 1 month. And then I'm free to go. Yes. Put it in writing. Cale didn't hesitate. He moved to his desk, pulled out parchment and ink. Wrote in clear, bold strokes. When he finished, he held it out. Celeste read carefully. The terms were exactly as stated. 1 month, full autonomy, freedom to leave. At the bottom, he'd signed his full name and title. Cale Thorne, King of the 5 Territories. You need a witness, she said. For it to be legally binding, yes. He stepped to the tent opening, called out. Marcus. A man approached, older, gray-bearded, wearing the insignia of a high-ranking officer. He looked at the parchment, then at Celeste, then back at Cale. Are you certain, my lord? His voice was carefully neutral. I am. Marcus signed as witness, without further argument. When he left, Celeste folded the parchment carefully and tucked it inside her torn dress. Satisfied? Cale asked. Getting there. She turned to face him fully. One more thing. During this month, I want access to your library. And I want to learn the actual laws regarding Omega rights. The real ones, not what my father told me.
Done.
Anything else? Yes. She lifted her chin. I want to learn to fight.
Properly.
If I'm going to be in your world, I'm not staying defenseless. For the first time, Cale smiled. Not a polite curve of lips, but something genuine. It transformed his face from severe to almost handsome. "I'll train you myself," he said. The clothes he'd provided were practical: wool pants, a thick tunic, riding boots. They fit well enough that she didn't ask questions. When she emerged from changing, Cale was waiting outside with 2 horses. "You ride?" he asked. "Adequately." "Good enough." They mounted and rode in silence through the forest. The horse was well trained, responsive to the lightest touch. Behind them, the camp sounds faded. Ahead, winter forest stretched endless. After an hour, Cale spoke. "You're quiet. I'm processing. Regrets." Celeste considered. "Not yet. Ask me in a month." "Fair." He glanced at her. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you climbed. Because you got what you wanted? Because you survived." His voice dropped. "Watching you on that ledge, knowing one slip could kill you, knowing I'd promised not to interfere, that was harder than any battle I've fought." She looked at him sharply. "You cared if I died?" "Of course I did. We're strangers." "We're not anymore." He guided his horse closer. 5 days of conversation across a cliff. That's more honesty than most people share in a lifetime. You told me about your father, your childhood, your fear of safety with conditions. I watched you choose survival over surrender every single day. We're not strangers, Celeste. We're just not partners yet. The word, yet, hung in the cold air.
She didn't argue with it.
They rode on as afternoon light turned golden, heading toward a manor she'd run from, toward a future she hadn't chosen but hadn't refused, toward whatever came next. 1 month, one choice at a time. It was more than she'd had 5 days ago. It was enough to keep moving forward. The manor was smaller than she remembered. Or maybe fear had made it seem larger. Now, riding up the approach in daylight, Celeste saw it clearly. A fortified estate, functional rather than opulent. Stone walls, high windows, defensive positioning. Built for security, not display. The gates opened at their approach. Servants appeared, taking horses, offering welcome. They looked at her with curiosity, but no judgment. If they remembered her as the runaway bride, they were too well trained to show it. Cale dismounted and offered his hand. She took it, letting him help her down. A formality, not a necessity. But the gesture mattered. "I'll show you to your quarters," he said. He led her through corridors she'd fled through 5 nights ago. They looked different now, less like a prison, more like a home. Tapestries on the walls. Fire warming the stones. Evidence of life, not just power. Her rooms were in the East Wing. He opened the door to a suite that was surprisingly simple. A bed, a desk, a wardrobe, a hearth already burning. Large windows overlooked the forest. "Bathrooms through there," Cale said, pointing. "Clothes in the wardrobe. If you need anything, pull that cord. Someone will come." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Dinner is at sunset. You're welcome to join me, but it's not required." "Will anyone else be there?" "Just us. Unless you'd prefer company." Celeste shook her head. "Just us is fine." He nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Alone, Celeste exhaled properly for the first time in hours. She walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cold glass. From here, she could see the forest where she'd run, the direction of the cliff. Everything looked smaller from above. She'd survived. Against odds, against cold, against her own fear. Now came the harder part, deciding if survival was enough, or if she wanted more. She bathed first, scrubbing 5 days of cliff from her skin. The water ran gray, then brown, then finally clear. Her body was marked, bruises on her knees, cuts on her palms, frostbite damage on her fingertips. Evidence. The wardrobe held simple, well-made clothes. She chose dark pants and a deep green tunic. Practical, but not shapeless. Her own choice, her own presentation. When sunset approached, she made her way to the dining room following a servant's directions. Kale was already there, standing by a window. He'd changed as well, still dark colors, but finer fabric. Less warrior, more king. He turned when she entered. His gaze traveled over her briefly, then settled on her face. Green suits you. It's practical. It's also attractive. Both can be true. He pulled out a chair. Please. The table was set simply. 2 plates, 2 cups, a bottle of wine. Food on platters meant to be shared, not served. Informal. Intimate. Celeste sat. Kale took the chair across from her, not at the head of the table, but as an equal. The detail didn't escape her notice. He poured wine without asking, filled her plate with roasted meat, vegetables, bread. Serving her, not commanding servants to do it. How are the rooms? He asked. Adequate. Just adequate? I'll let you know in a few days. Right now, everything still feels temporary. That's fair. He cut into his meat. What did you do this afternoon? Besides bathe. Explored. Tested the windows. His lips twitched. And they open. No bars. Second story, but climbable. She sipped her wine. You weren't lying about autonomy. I don't lie. I withhold sometimes, when information is dangerous.
But I don't lie.
He set down his knife. What else did you notice? No guards on my door. Servants, but they kept distance. The library is across from my rooms, convenient placement if I wanted access. You're observant. I'm Omega. We learn to read environments. It's survival. She met his eyes. What did you do this afternoon? Council meetings. Correspondence. Argued with my treasurer about winter supply allocations. He smiled slightly. Less interesting than your explorations. You're king. Shouldn't you have more important things to do than have dinner with me? This is important. Kale's expression grew more serious. Everything else is maintenance. Territory, politics, economics, that's managing what exists. This. He gestured between them. This is building something new. That takes priority. Celeste studied him. You really believe that? I do. He refilled her wine. Tell me something. When you were on that cliff, what kept you going? What made you hold on instead of letting go? The question was more intimate than it seemed. She considered deflecting, then remembered their agreement. Honesty in exchange for autonomy. Spite initially, she admitted. I didn't want you to win. And later? Curiosity. I wanted to know if you'd actually keep your word. If patience meant something or if it was just another form of control.
She paused.
And maybe I wanted to know what I looked like when I stopped running. Kale was very still. And? What do you look like? I don't know yet. Ask me in a month. He laughed, low, genuine, using my own timeline against me. Well played. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The food was good, the wine better. Celeste felt her body beginning to truly relax for the first time in days. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Anything. When you were watching me on that cliff, if I had fallen, would you have felt guilty? Kale set down his cup carefully.
Yes.
But I still wouldn't have stopped you. Because guilt is my burden to carry, not your agency to surrender. He met her eyes. Your choices are yours. The consequences are mine to feel. That's part of respecting someone. Celeste absorbed that. Most people don't think that way. Most people confuse love with control. He stood, began clearing plates. I learned early that you can't own another person. You can only earn the privilege of standing beside them.
Who taught you that?
My mother, before she died. He carried dishes to a sideboard. She told me that power without respect is tyranny. That a crown doesn't make you worthy. Your actions do. She sounds wise. She was. Kale returned to the table, but didn't sit. I'm going to my study to finish correspondence. You're welcome to join me, or return to your rooms. or explore further. Whatever you prefer. Celeste stood as well. I think I'll read. In the library. Good choice. There's a book on the second shelf, third from the left. Blue binding. Omega writes throughout history. Might interest you. He'd placed it there deliberately. For her.
Thank you, she said.
For what? For making this bearable. Something soft crossed his expression. It's supposed to be more than bearable. Eventually. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Celeste? I'm glad you're here. In case that wasn't clear. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the dining room with the echoes of honesty. She made her way to the library, found the book exactly where he'd said, settled into a chair by the fire, and began to read. Outside, winter darkness fell. Inside, for the first time in her life, Celeste felt something like safety. It terrified her almost as much as the cliff had. But she kept reading anyway. One dinner down, 30 days to go, and she's starting to see him clearly. Subscribe to see if recognition becomes trust, and if safety becomes something worth choosing. Cale woke her before dawn. Not by entering her room. He knocked, called through the door. Training starts in 20 minutes.
Courtyard.
Dress warm. Celeste rolled out of bed, every muscle protesting. 5 days on a cliff followed by riding hadn't left her body in optimal condition. But she'd asked for this. She demanded it. She dressed in the training clothes left outside her door. Thick pants, wrapped tunic, leather bracers. Boots with good traction. When she reached the courtyard, gray pre-dawn light revealed Cale already there, stripped to shirt sleeves despite the cold. He was stretching. Methodical, controlled movements. He looked up when she approached. You're late, he said. You said 20 minutes. I said training starts in 20 minutes. Warm-up is part of training. He gestured. Match my movements. She followed his lead through stretches that made her realize exactly how immobile 5 days of stillness had made her. Her legs shook. Her shoulders burned.
She didn't complain.
When they finished, Cale moved to a weapons rack. How much combat training do you have?
None.
Some self-defense. Improvised. Good. Means no bad habits to unlearn. He selected 2 wooden practice swords, tossed her one. Basic stance first. Watch. He demonstrated, feet shoulder width, knees slightly bent, sword held low and ready. Balanced, centered. She mimicked him. He circled her slowly, making small corrections. Weight more on your front foot. Shoulders down. You're too tense. You'll exhaust yourself before any fight starts. His hands touched her shoulders, pressing down gently. The contact was impersonal, instructional. Better. Now hold it. They stood in stance for what felt like hours. Her legs trembled. Sweat beaded despite the cold. Cale remained perfectly still beside her, not even breathing hard. Why this? She asked through gritted teeth. Because fighting is 90% positioning, 10% action. You need to know how your body moves before you can make it move effectively. When he finally called time, her legs nearly gave out. He caught her elbow, steadied her. Good first day. That's all we're doing? That's all you can do. Push too hard too fast, you'll injure yourself. We train every morning. Progression is earned, not rushed. He walked toward the manor, then called back. Breakfast is ready.
Eat.
Your body needs fuel. They fell into a routine. Every morning, training. Cale was a patient but demanding teacher. Stance became footwork. Footwork became strikes. Strikes became combinations. She learned that fighting was less about strength and more about leverage, timing, angles. She also learned that Cale fought like he negotiated, with absolute control and devastating precision. You're holding back, she accused one morning after he disarmed her for the 10th time. Of course I am. We're training, not warring. I can't learn if you treat me like glass. Something flickered in his expression. Challenge accepted.
Fine.
Next round, full speed. You asked for it. The next exchange lasted 3 seconds. He moved like water, flowed around her guard, had her on her back with the practice sword at her throat before she could process the motion. She stared up at him, breathing hard. That's full speed, he said calmly. Still want it? Yes. He offered his hand, pulled her up. Then you'll earn it. Speed without control is flailing. Master control first. Afternoons she spent in the library. The book on Omega rights revealed truths that made her angry. How many laws protected designation over person? How many rights Omegas technically had but were never told about? She took notes. Built arguments. Sometimes Kale would join her, reading his own materials, occasionally answering her questions when she asked. He never preached, never lectured, just provided information and let her form her own conclusions. Evenings they had dinner.
Sometimes they talked about the day.
Sometimes they debated philosophy, politics, history. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Slowly, carefully, she began to see him as a person rather than a category. He was patient but not soft. Intelligent but not condescending. Powerful but not tyrannical. He commanded respect through competence, not fear. His staff moved efficiently around him because they wanted to serve well, not because they were afraid of failure. 2 weeks in, during training, she finally landed a hit. The practice sword connected with his ribs, pulled, not enough to hurt, but contact. Kale stepped back, hand to his side, expression pleased. Good. Again. You're not angry? Why would I be angry? You're learning. He raised his sword.
Again.
See if you can do it twice. She couldn't, but she tried. 3 weeks in, at dinner, she asked, what happens after the month? If I stay.
Kale set down his wine.
We negotiate terms. What partnership means for both of us. What you want. What I need. Where compromise exists. Marriage, eventually if you want it. With full legal protections. Your rights preserved in writing, witnessed by counsel. But that's down the line. First, we see if we actually work together. And if we don't, then we tried, and it's better to know now than after vows. He tilted his head.
Why?
Are you considering staying? Celeste looked at him across the table. At the man who'd waited 5 days on a cliff. Who trained her every morning without complaint. Who'd given her autonomy and proven he meant it. I'm considering not leaving, she said carefully. That's not the same as staying. It's a start. Kale smiled. I'll take it. That night, lying in bed, Celeste realized something that both comforted and terrified her. She trusted him. Not blindly. Not completely. But enough to believe that if she said no, he'd honor it. Enough to believe that his offer of partnership was genuine. Enough to start wondering what saying yes might look like. The month wasn't over. She still had a week to decide. But the decision was starting to feel less like a question and more like an answer she was slowly admitting to. The month ended on a morning identical to all the others. Training at dawn. Kale correcting her stance, praising her improvement, pushing her to try combinations that felt impossible until they weren't. Breakfast after, both of them sweaty and tired and comfortable in the silence. But when they finished eating, he set down his cup and said, It's been 30 days. Celeste's heart stuttered. She knew. Of course she knew. But hearing him acknowledge it made it real. I remember, she said. So. Kale leaned back in his chair. What's your decision? She'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her head. Planned speeches. Prepared arguments. All of them evaporated now that the moment had arrived. Can I ask you something first? She said. Anything. What do you actually want from me? Not partnership in theory. In practice.
Day to day.
What does that look like? Kale considered for a long moment. I want someone who challenges my decisions when I'm wrong. Who brings perspective I don't have? Who can rule beside me, not behind me? I want intellectual sparring over breakfast and honest counsel in meetings. I want someone strong enough to push back and wise enough to know when pushing isn't necessary. That's practical. You asked for practice. He paused. But if you're asking what I want personally, I want more mornings like this. More dinners where we talk until the candles burn out. More moments where I see you smile because you've beaten me in an argument or landed a hit during training. I want to earn your trust completely. And eventually, if you want it too, I want intimacy. Partnership in all its forms. Celeste's throat tightened. And if I can't give you that, some of it, maybe, but not all. Then we negotiate. Figure out what works for both of us. Kale met her eyes. I'm not asking for perfection, Celeste. I'm asking for willingness to try. She stood, needing to move. Walked to the window. Outside, winter was beginning to break. She could see the first hints of thaw, snow melting, buds forming on bare branches. Change coming. I came here as a purchased bride, she said slowly. A transaction. No choice, no voice. Just a designation and a debt. She turned to face him. You could have kept it that way. Could have made this about ownership, about power. But you didn't. Kale remained seated, waiting. You gave me autonomy when you didn't have to. Trained me when you could have kept me dependent. Honored every promise you made, even the ones that cost you. She crossed back to the table. You treated me like a person before I was your partner. That matters. So, what's your answer? Celeste pulled the folded parchment from her pocket, the agreement they'd signed a month ago. She set it on the table between them. I'm tearing this up, she said. Kale's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands tighten on the armrests. Why? Because I don't need an escape clause anymore. She met his eyes. I'm staying, not because of a contract or a timeline, because I choose to. The silence stretched. Then Kale stood slowly, moved around the table. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the pulse at his throat, the careful control in his expression. You're sure? He asked quietly.
No.
I'm terrified, but I'm also certain that what we've built here is worth the fear. She lifted her chin. So yes, I'm staying, as your partner, with the understanding that we're still figuring out what that means. Kale's hand came up slowly, giving her time to move away. She didn't. His palm cupped her jaw, gentle despite the calluses. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. You have no idea how much this means, he said, voice rough. Then tell me. I will. Every day if you let me. He leaned down slowly, watching her eyes, giving her every opportunity to stop this. She didn't. The kiss was careful, questioning, his lips warm against hers, tasting of tea, and something uniquely him. She responded tentatively at first, then with more certainty. Her hands found his shoulders, gripped solid muscle beneath fabric. When they broke apart, both breathing harder, Kale rested his forehead against hers. That's a yes then, he asked. Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the enormity of what she'd just committed to, Celeste laughed. That's a yes. They spent the rest of the day making plans. What partnership would mean practically, her role in council meetings, her authority in his territory, how they'd handle disagreements. Kale drafted documents with her input, equal protections, and equal power. Not because law required it, but because he wanted it. That evening, he called together his council and introduced her. Not as Omega, not as bride, as his chosen partner, his equal in governance. Some faces showed surprise. Others showed approval. One older man looked openly skeptical. Kale noticed. You have concerns, Marcus? He asked. The man, the same who'd witnessed their original agreement, stepped forward. I question the wisdom of elevating someone so new to power, my lord. Noted. Kale's voice stayed level. What else? She has no training in governance, no background in law or economics, no understanding of the territories. Also noted, which is why she'll be learning. Same as I did. Same as you did. Kale glanced at Celeste. Anything you want to add? She met Marcus's skeptical gaze. You're right. I don't have formal training, but I've survived circumstances that would break most people. I've learned to read power dynamics out of necessity, and I'm smart enough to know what I don't know and ask for help. She paused. I'm not here to replace anyone or prove anything. I'm here to learn, to contribute where I can, and to support decisions that serve the territories well. If you can work with that, we'll get along fine. If you can't, that's between you and your king. Silence. Then Marcus nodded slowly. Fair enough. Welcome, my lady. The title felt strange, but Celeste accepted it. Later, in her rooms, no, their rooms now, if she wanted, Kale asked, how does it feel? Terrifying. Exhilarating. Real. She turned to him. How long until I stop feeling like I'll wake up back on that cliff? Probably a while. But I'll be here to remind you that you climbed. He pulled her close, careful and certain. You chose this. That makes it real. She leaned into him, let herself be held. For the first time in her life, safety didn't come with conditions. Trust didn't require surrender. It just required someone worthy of both. She'd found him, and she'd chosen him. The cliff was behind her. Whatever came next, council meetings, governance, partnership in all its complicated forms, she'd face it not as Omega or bride or designation, but as herself. Celeste. Chosen.
Equal. Free. The end.
From a runaway bride to a chosen partner, their bond was forged on a cliff and sealed in recognition. Subscribe for more stories where survival becomes strength and acknowledgement becomes everything.